Hello grade 10s, welcome to another online English lesson. I'm Miss Linley and today we have a prescribed poem to discuss. The poem is called A Young Man's Thoughts Before June the 16th. You should know that June the 16th is a significant day in South Africa. We celebrate it as Youth Day. Now the poet is called Faisal Johannes. He's a South African poet and he wrote most of his poetry during the 1970s and 80s. He and Chris van Wyk, who is another poet that wrote during this time, started a movement that promoted an awareness of the dignity and rights of Black people. Now, Chris van Wyk and Faisal Johannes wrote protest poetry. Protest poetry is poetry that addresses real socio-political issues and voices an objection to something, specifically here to the government and the apartheid regime. Now, protest poetry is meant to evoke emotion from the reader, be it sadness or anger, and inspire the audience to desire change. All races of people wrote protest poetry during South Africa. White, colored, and Black people. And this is a good example of the type of protest poetry that is found from that time. Now, the title of the poem refers to June the 16th, 1976, where high school children from Soweto marched to protest against the law that half of their schooling had to be in Afrikaans. Now, in general, this was also a protest against Bantu education, which is something that we'll come back to later. We know it as the Soweto uprising, and many young people were injured or killed during this protest. In the poem, the poet imagines himself as one of the teenagers the day before the event. So the poet himself did not take part in the Soweto uprising, but the speaker, the narrator, is a character that he creates, and he imagines that if he were one of those teenagers, this is how he would have felt. So we must distinguish between the poet and the speaker in this situation. Right, let's have a look at the title. A Young Man's Thought Before June the 16th. Imagine the poem without a title. How much meaning would we lose? So if we read the poem, tomorrow I travel on a road that winds to the top of the hill. I take with me only the sweet memory of my youth. My heart aches for my mother, for Friday nights with friends, around a table with a broad belch of beer. I ask only for a sad song sung by a woman with downturned eyes, and strummed by an old man with a broken brow. Oh, sing my sad song, sing for me, for my sunset is drenched with red. Without the reference in the title to June the 16th, we lose a lot of context as to what the poem is about. The theme of the poem is a scathing comment on the apartheid regime, fighting for a cause, taking a stand against oppression, and human courage. The first thing I usually advise you to do when looking at a poem is to look at the rhyme scheme. Now, if we start trying to plot the rhyme scheme of this poem and we assign the letter A to the last word of the first line, road, and then hill in the second line would be B, sweet in the third line would be C, youth, D, mother, E. And as we go on this way, we can see that the poem has no set rhyme scheme, which means that it is written in free verse. Now, if you remember that free verse is often significant because it deals with themes to do with freedom or lack of freedom, just like Maya Angelou's Caged Bird. You also notice that there is no punctuation in the poem, no capital letters, and that the poem is full of enjambment, which is when a sentence runs on over several lines. Free verse represents freedom or lack of freedom or a desire for freedom. No capital letters and no punctuation lend towards a conversational tone. The speaker is speaking casually in this poem. Whenever you are speaking to one of your friends, I'm sure that you don't consider where you would put a full stop or a comma in the sentences that you are saying. So the speaker is very casually, conversationally telling us about his thoughts before June 16th. Now, another thing worth noting is how these three elements relate to the system of Bantu education. Now, we know that Bantu education was the education that the government provided for black learners during the time of apartheid, which was different from the education provided for white learners and others, because the government thought it was appropriate for black learners to learn more practical things that would help them with the jobs that they were allowed to do, and because they were not encouraged to go to university, they were not considered to be it wasn't considered necessary for them to learn certain things. So Bantu education was a disadvantage to black learners, and this is another thing that they were protesting, along with the Afrikaans in their curriculum. So the breakaway from the poetic conventions or the rules of poetry, such as rhyme, and all those other things, symbolizes a breaking away from the political oppression of the time and a fight for freedom. The enjambment or the run-on lines contribute to the sense of a conversation, reflecting natural speech patterns. Speaking is a lot more casual than writing. Let's have a look at the first two lines. Tomorrow I travel on a road that winds to the top of the hill. Tomorrow I travel, we have the alliteration of the T sound, on a road. So he is embarking on a journey. He's going somewhere. That's what he's telling us. That winds to the top of the hill. The road winds, meaning that it's not a straight road. It's not an easy road to travel. It's a winding road. He knows it will not be easy. It winds to the top of the hill. Interestingly, he says the hill and not a hill. So it's not a random hill that he's climbing. It is the hill that is the struggle that everyone knows about. He is embarking on a journey to try and fight the struggle. Now, the road winds to the top of the hill, but he never mentions that he himself will arrive at the top of the hill. So maybe he expects that he's the one that's starting on this journey, but he might not be around when the destination is finally reached. So he expects that he's doing something to help in the struggle, but he won't be there when the struggle is over, which is quite sad if you think about it. Right, he reflects as he prepares himself for June 16th in these two lines, and he realizes that he has chosen a difficult road to travel. It will not be straight or flat. Right, the next two lines say, I take with me only the sweet memories of my youth. Now, memories of my youth makes me think that this young man believes that his youth is over. Now, it doesn't say a teenager's thoughts before June 16th. It says a young man's thoughts before June 16th. And later on in the poem, he mentions drinking beer with his friends. So these are all signifiers that he doesn't see himself as a child anymore. Now, he might still be a teenager. He might be 18 or 19. he might even be in his 20s, because if you remember from your novel Mother to Mother, it was quite common for young people to be in high school in their 20s, especially if they were in the poor township schools, because the schools were not equipped to handle so many children, and a lot of them didn't attend school, or they didn't understand the teaching at schools and they failed, so they would be repeating years for quite a lot of time. Right, then he remembers the sweet parts of his childhood, of his youth, and that's sort of helping him, or it will help him to face what's coming. The next line says, my heart aches for my mother. My heart aches for my mother. There are two possible meanings. One, that he feels sad that his mother will suffer due to his actions, and the other is that he wants to stay with his mother, but he can't. Right, next we have a look at for Friday nights with friends. Now remember, he speaks about my heart aches for my mother, and for Friday nights with my friends, around a table with the broad belch of beer. Again, we have alliteration with the Friday and friends, and then broad belch of beer. But belch is also an onomatopoeia. Belch is the sound of a burp. So why would he give us this sound, this onomatopoeia? Well, the alliteration slows the pace for us, and this onomatopoeia draws us into these moments. It makes us feel familiar and relate to these memories that he has. He is portrayed as a sociable type who will miss his Friday night drinking with his buddies. The young man is made relatable. We get to know him. It's humanizing. We feel more for a character that we know more about or that we can relate to. The B alliteration slows down one's reading, and the onomatopoeia makes you hear the sound almost, draws you into the moment. Our next lines, I ask only for a sad song sung by a woman with downturned eyes. Again, we have the alliteration of the S sound, which is called sibilance. Now, if you remember sibilance, it usually has the effect of making the reader feel uneasy or uncomfortable. It slows the pace as well. And this also shows us that when a person is mourning or grieving someone, they cannot rush through that process. It's a slow process. Now, the sad song will be sung by a woman with downturned eyes. Downturned in sadness or in submission to the government's regime. Now, sometimes downturned eyes are seen as a sign of respect to an authority. So either this woman is sad, or this woman, who represents women in general, or the older generation of women, are submitting to the government or to apartheid. Now, when he asks for a sad song, it shows that he hopes that his sacrifice will be meaningful, that it will make a difference in the struggle. And we already spoke about downturned eyes and why the older generation responds with downturned eyes. Now, if you remember in Mother to Mother, the novel that we are doing, the youth are frustrated with the elders because they seem to have just accepted the apartheid system, and they don't want to fight. They don't want to cause trouble, because they think that they can't win, and it seems that they've given up, and the young people are very unhappy with how the elders have just accepted their oppression. And this downturned eye shows us the same sort of thing here. Right, so the song that is sung for him is strummed by an old man. So the woman sings and the old man strums. To strum is to play on a string instrument. So the old man takes part in the music by strumming, and the old man has a broken brow. Now this is alliteration again. And why would we say that the old man has a broken brow? Maybe he's got wrinkles, so there's lines on his brow, or maybe his brow is furrowed or crunched in pain, or maybe it's a representation of a broken spirit or a broken mind. Now, if we look at the possibility that the man with a broken brow could be his father, or it could be a representation of the older generation as a whole, then the broken brow representing a broken spirit makes sense. That the older generation has been oppressed and just treated very badly for a long time, and they just feel that their spirits have been broken. They are not able to fight. Right. Now we look at the last two lines. Oh, sing my sad song, sing for me, for my sunset is drenched with red. Now we have this oh, this exclamation. It is the greatest show of emotion in the poem. We see that he feels something here. Sing my sad song. Again, we have this alliteration, and it is repetition because we have heard sad songs sung in previous lines. Again, causing us to feel uneasy, and a repetition for emphasis here. For my sunset is drenched with red. Drenched means completely soaked or wet with water, or here red means blood. So the red symbol means blood, but red can also symbolize violence or anger or even passion or love. And I think it's interesting that he could be referring to his passion for his cause and his love for his people that is also causing him to embark on this journey. So the metaphor and euphemism is that he compares the end of his life to a sunset. Now, we usually don't think of a sunset as a negative thing, but here the red of the sunset is violence and blood. And it's ironic because the sunset is usually followed by a sunrise, but for this young man there will be no sunrise after June 16th. Okay, so I hope that my explanation has helped you understand the poem, and you can have a look at the questions again and just see whether you can make more sense of them. And remember that your interpretations are valid and important, and as long as you can support your statements with evidence from the text, then you should do okay. Alright, so good luck everyone. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.